My name is Emma Calder. I'm 32 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought my life was finally falling into place. I live in a small but stylish apartment just outside of Seattle, where I work as an independent financial consultant. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and lets me stay in control, something I've always needed, especially growing up with a mother like mine. For years, my relationship with her was complicated at best, a tightrope walk between affection and resentment. But nothing, not even our worst fights, prepared me for the moment she disappeared with my $10 million. It all started with my grandfather's death. He was a private man, wealthy, cautious, and incredibly smart. He didn't trust banks and hated lawyers, which made his decision to leave everything to me in a sealed envelope all the more strange. The document looked official enough. His signature, a notary stamp, and clear instructions that the funds were mine, held in a secure private account. It felt surreal. I had gone from scraping by to suddenly becoming a multi-millionaire, or so I thought. My mother, Dana, had been distant during the funeral. She wasn't crying. She barely spoke to me. She looked more like someone playing a role than a grieving daughter. When I showed her the document, expecting surprise or even a hint of jealousy, she didn't flinch. Instead, she gave me a strange smile and said, "Enjoy it while you can." That should have been my first warning, but I ignored it. I wanted to believe this was my fresh start, not a new beginning to something darker. 3 days later, she was gone, vanished. No note, no text, nothing. My calls went straight to voicemail. The only thing she left behind was a printed message slid under my door in the middle of the night. It read, "You'll never see that money again." My blood ran cold. I called the bank in a panic, only to learn that the account listed in the inheritance document had already been accessed and emptied, using credentials that matched my mother's information. It was like she had planned this all along. I went straight to the police, but they weren't much help. Family disputes over inheritance happen all the time, the officer said, barely looking up from his screen. "We'll file a report, but unless there's proof of fraud or coercion, there's not much we can do." I wanted to scream. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was theft, betrayal. My own mother had stolen from me. I felt humiliated for ever trusting her, and more terrified than I've ever been in my life. Desperate, I hired a private investigator named Clay. He was sharp, skeptical, and expensive. The kind of guy who only takes cases that interest him. "Your mother left with $10 million, he said, flipping through the fake-looking inheritance document. "That makes you either incredibly naive or part of something a lot more dangerous than you realize." I didn't like him, but I needed him. He was my only shot at finding her, and the money. Clay started digging, and I tried to go on with my life, but it wasn't easy. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw my mother's eyes staring back. I kept asking myself how I didn't see it coming. The way she always asked about my grandfather's finances, how she lingered too long on certain conversations, or how she always seemed to know more than she let on. Was she planning this for years? Did she ever actually love me? Weeks passed, and Clay found a lead, a storage unit rented under a fake name in Oregon. When we drove down together and cracked it open, we found dozens of documents, forged signatures, fake banking credentials, and something that made my stomach twist. 2 different versions of my grandfather's will, one real, one altered. Clay looked at me and said, "I think we've just found out who really wrote that inheritance letter." I sat on the cold concrete floor, clutching the documents like they could somehow reverse everything. My whole identity was unraveling. What if my grandfather never meant to leave me that money? What if I was just a pawn in whatever scheme my mother had been running? I had so many questions, but one burned more than the rest. Why me? Why had she set me up to believe in something that was never mine to begin with? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every conversation we ever had. Every moment I tried to win her approval. Every hug that now felt calculated. I was angry, but more than that, I was hurt. I needed answers, and I knew the only way to get them was to find her. Not just to get the money back, but to understand who my mother really was. Because until I did, I couldn't trust anything. Not even myself. Clay and I spent the next week combing through every document we found in that storage unit. It was like digging through someone else's life, a person I didn't recognize but who had my mother's handwriting, her habits, her obsession with control. There were ledgers, bank statements, fake IDs, and names I'd never heard of. "Your mother wasn't just planning this," Clay muttered. "She's been running these kinds of games for years." It didn't feel real. How could the woman who packed my school lunches and held me when I cried be this criminal? There were addresses linked to some of the documents. We followed them. One was a rundown apartment in Boise, where a neighbor remembered a woman named Diane, who paid in cash and kept to herself. Diane, close enough to Dana to be deliberate. Another was a P.O. box in Reno, filled with junk mail and overdue notices. Piece by piece, Clay built a profile. Aliases, patterns, past scams. My mother wasn't just gone. She was a ghost, and I was chasing her shadow through a maze of lies. What haunted me more than anything was the possibility that my grandfather might have known. Could he have suspected what she was capable of? Was that why he handed me the letter in secret, away from lawyers and family? Or was that letter a lie too? One she crafted, knowing I'd fall for it? I remembered the way he looked at me the last time we spoke. There was sadness in his eyes. Maybe guilt. Maybe warning. "Be careful who you trust, Em," he had said. I thought he meant other people. I never imagined he meant her. I started having nightmares. In one, I was standing in front of a vault, holding the letter, and every time I reached for the handle, it crumbled in my hands. In another, I'd open my front door and my mother would be standing there, smiling, as if nothing had happened. "Did you really think it was yours?" she'd whisper before fading into the dark. I woke up drenched in sweat, the anger turning into something colder, fear. I didn't know who she was anymore. I wasn't even sure who I was. Then came the phone call. Clay had traced a financial transaction, a transfer from one of the fake accounts to a charity organization in Phoenix. Not just any charity, but one that specialized in transitional housing for women. We thought it was a dead end, until one of the employees remembered a recent resident, a woman in her 50s, quiet, with intense eyes and a fake name no one could remember. But they had something better, a security video. Clay sent it to me. I hit play. There she was, walking down a hallway, her hair pulled back, wearing clothes that didn't fit her usual style. She looked thinner, older, but it was her, my mother, Dana, or Diane, or whatever name she was using. She glanced at the camera for half a second before slipping into a room. That one glance sent a chill down my spine. It was like she knew someone would be watching one day, like she wanted me to find her, or was daring me to try. I flew to Phoenix the next day. Clay insisted on coming, but I told him I needed to do this alone. I wasn't thinking straight. My hands shook on the plane. I didn't know what I'd say if I found her. I didn't even know what I wanted. An apology? The money back? Some kind of twisted explanation? But deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted to look her in the eyes and see if there was anything left of the mother I once loved. The charity center confirmed she had checked out 3 days earlier. Left no forwarding address, no contact info. Just like before. Gone before I could get close. But they gave me something unexpected. A notebook she'd left behind. Most of it was blank, but one page had a short note. "Emma, if you're reading this, then you followed me farther than I thought you would. Please stop. It's not what you think." I stared at those words for hours. What wasn't what I thought? I checked into a motel that night, holding the notebook like it was a bomb. I kept rereading the message. What did she mean by that? What wasn't I seeing? Clay called, asking for an update. I told him about the notebook, and he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe she's not just hiding. Maybe she's protecting something, or someone." That idea rattled me. Could this be bigger than just theft? Was there someone else involved? The next morning, I woke up to find my motel room door ajar. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place. Except for one thing. The notebook was gone. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring at the door like it might move again. The notebook was gone. I checked every corner of the room twice. No signs of forced entry, no broken lock, no footsteps in the carpet. Whoever took it knew exactly what they were doing. That notebook was the only direct connection I had to my mother. And now, it was gone. I called Clay immediately. He listened quietly, then said, "She knows you're close. That's why she's cleaning up." But if that was true, why leave me a message at all? That afternoon, I went back to the shelter. I asked to speak with anyone who might have had more than a passing conversation with her. One volunteer, a woman in her 60s named Carol, remembered her clearly. She was always writing, Carol said. Little notes, sometimes letters she'd never send. One time she told me, "The paper's the only place I can tell the truth." That stuck with me. If the notebook was her safe space, why leave it behind? And more importantly, who took it? Clay sent me a new lead, a man named Victor Rains. The name had popped up on several of the fake documents we found, including a shared P.O. box in San Diego. According to Clay, Victor had been involved in 2 fraud investigations, both of which mysteriously vanished from the records. "I think he was working with your mother," Clay said, "or controlling her." The idea made me sick. Was she just a pawn in someone else's scheme? Or worse, a willing partner? I flew to San Diego. It was humid, the kind of sticky heat that made everything feel heavier. Clay had set up a meeting with a retired IRS investigator who had once pursued Victor Rains. The man, Roger Mendez, agreed to talk in a quiet diner just off the highway. "Victor doesn't operate unless he has leverage," Roger said, sipping black coffee. "He finds people in trouble, people who want out. Then he builds something they can't escape." I asked him if he thought my mother was trapped. He shook his head. If she was with Victor, she knew what she was doing. That night, I sat alone in my motel room, replaying everything. The notebook, the message, the security video. My mother had been on the move, but never aimlessly. She left clues. She left warnings. But now it felt like someone was one step ahead of me, removing the pieces just as I reached for them. I couldn't tell if I was chasing her, or if I was being lured somewhere. And still, I kept asking myself, why? Why go through all this trouble just to disappear? The next morning, Clay called with a strange update. He'd checked the motel's surveillance footage. No one had entered my room. No one except me. "That notebook didn't just vanish," he said. "Someone either paid off the staff or knew exactly how to get in without being seen." I felt my stomach twist. That meant one thing. Someone had been watching me closely. And whoever it was, they wanted that notebook badly enough to risk being caught. I began to think like her. If I were Dana, or Diane, or whatever name she was using, and I wanted to disappear for good, what would I do next? The trail pointed toward the coast. Small towns, cash economies, a place where no one asked questions. I remembered a story she once told me about a beach in Mendocino she used to visit as a teenager. "That's where I felt most like myself," she had said. It seemed like nothing at the time, but maybe that was the point. I rented a car and drove up the coast. Long stretches of highway passed under gray skies and ocean wind. I stopped only for gas and coffee, checking maps and old directories. In Mendocino, I walked every beach she might have visited. I didn't expect to find her. Not really. But then I saw the cottage. Faded blue paint, tucked behind a grove of trees. A tiny sign that read, "Sea Pines Retreat." I walked up the steps, heart pounding. Inside, an older woman greeted me. I asked if anyone named Diane had been staying there. She hesitated. "She left yesterday," she said. Quiet woman, always looking over her shoulder. "Left this behind." She handed me a single envelope, no return address. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a photograph. My mother, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. She was smiling, not the forced kind, but real. On the back, just one line. "This is who I had to protect." I stared at the photograph for hours. My mother stood beside a man with kind eyes, maybe in his 40s, wearing a faded baseball cap. There was no fear in her posture, no shame, just warmth. The note on the back haunted me. This is who I had to protect. But protect from what? And why steal from me to do it? I showed the picture to Clay, and he ran a quick scan. The man was identified as Samuel Brooks, a former whistleblower, once part of a federal witness protection program. That changed everything. Clay pieced it together faster than I could. Dana hadn't run away just for the money. She'd used it to protect this man, and maybe herself. Samuel had gone underground years ago after exposing a major banking corruption scandal. Apparently, someone powerful wanted him dead. "Your mother must have gotten involved with him after your grandfather died," Clay said. "Maybe they fell in love. Maybe she owed him something. But it looks like she used your inheritance to buy silence, or safety." It felt like whiplash. One moment I thought I was chasing a thief. The next I was uncovering a conspiracy I was never meant to be part of. I felt betrayed all over again. Not just by my mother, but by the narrative I'd told myself. I'd seen myself as the victim, and maybe I was. But I hadn't considered that my mother might have been running from something far more dangerous than guilt. She was hiding in plain sight. Yes, but maybe not for herself. I returned to Seattle with more questions than answers. Clay continued his digging, but even he admitted we'd reached the end of the trail. She doesn't want to be found now, he said. Whatever she's doing, it's bigger than us. I started going back to work, trying to rebuild my life, but I was different now. Everything looked familiar, but felt hollow. The money was gone. My mother was gone. And in a strange way, so was the version of myself I used to be. Weeks passed before I heard from her again. A single letter, no return address, typed instead of handwritten. Emma, it began. I know you want closure. I wish I could give it to you. But if I told you the whole truth, I'd be putting you in the same danger I spent my life trying to avoid. I never meant to hurt you. I only meant to survive. There was no apology. Just that. Survival. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I started therapy soon after. I needed to process not just the betrayal, but the ambiguity, the unanswered questions, the parts of my mother I'd never fully understand. Some days I felt angry. Other days, numb. But there were rare mornings when I'd wake up and feel something close to peace, like I could breathe again, like I was slowly letting go of the need for every answer. Maybe that was what she wanted for me, in her own twisted way. One evening, I walked to my grandfather's old property, now abandoned, the house in ruins. I stood by the tree we used to sit under and thought about everything he might have known. Maybe he didn't leave me that money. Maybe he did, and she took it anyway. I'd never know for sure. But standing there, I realized something important. My story didn't end with what she took from me. It would continue with what I chose to do now. I decided to write about it, not for revenge, not to expose her, but to understand myself. I started putting together every document, every photo, every clue, shaping it into something coherent, something I could live with. People always say truth is stranger than fiction, but what they don't say is that sometimes the truth doesn't feel true until you tell it out loud. That's why I'm sharing this with you. This wasn't a story about stolen money. It was a story about broken trust, about survival, about the tangled lines between love and betrayal. It's about how sometimes the people who raise us are also the ones who leave the deepest scars, and how, in the end, the only thing we can do is decide who we want to be, even if the people who made us never showed us how. So yes, my mother ran off with $10 million, but what she really took was the version of me that still believed in her, and what she left behind was something I never expected to find, a woman strong enough to start over, even when the past refuses to let go.